Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach. Hope you guys are going well out there. Just Friday afternoon. Shorty's done a bit of study today. Ducked down to Anglesea. It's been a handy little day so far, but I thought it'd be good to do a video, and I thought I'd punch it out before the weekend starts. Having a few drinks tomorrow night should be a bit of fun, and going to the footy, which I can't wait for. Geelong and Richmond. I can't remember last time I went to a game of footy, so I'm really excited for that. But I've had a few requests to do a chat about draft, and a lot of people would be getting stuck into their draft leagues, and you might be currently drafting if it works over, a no time limit, or you might have a specific draft day coming up. So I thought I would touch on that. I also wanted to mention, and you can find this in the description, and I'll probably put in the comments at some stage as well, a footy tipping comp. I wanted to get that started as well, and a SuperCoach group. There will be leagues coming out. Not everyone can obviously fit into all the leagues, so I'll hopefully get everyone involved via a group. It's not quite the same, but still, it's better than nothing. So let's talk SuperCoach draft. It's my favorite element of the game, and some might say the only part of it I'm good at. So Classic hasn't been my friend over the last couple of years, but over the last couple of years in my mates league, I've taken the flag out and made the grand final. So we just have an 8-team competition. We draft on one day. And if you are teeing up a draft or putting it together, I'd strongly recommend, if you can get everyone there on the one day, or at least available on a device on the one day, it's a far better representation of who actually knows their stuff. Because let's face it, when you got no time limits, or you can go off and research and think about it, sit on it, weigh it up. Where on the draft day, you got 60 seconds or 90 seconds, whatever it is. There's a genuine skill to that. So I'll touch on that in a few moments, but I would strongly encourage that if you can find it. I know it's difficult to do it. It's hard enough trying to find a couple of mates all available on the one day, let alone 8 to 12. But I would strongly recommend that. In that instance, if you are doing a draft day, it's all happening at once, I think the best thing that you can bring to the table is a bit of mental preparation. I see a lot of people talk about spreadsheets and rankings and writing stuff down. I'm not a big one for that. I might be a bit different because I do so many videos and look at it so much that a lot of it's just in my head. It just comes to me quite quickly. What I always do is I will write down in my phone a few guys that maybe aren't at the top end, but I want to select, sort of, if that makes sense. You can scroll, you've sort of got to scroll a long way, because I feel like most players remain fairly relevant in the first, couple of pages or the first few scrolls of your selection when you get there. But what you can sometimes overlook are guys that you really wanted that were a few way down the page, like maybe a Cam Rayner, or maybe really like Steve Cornelio, or Matt Rowell might be an example, or James Sicily, guys that are better than where they're priced at, which therefore makes them lower on the drafting table. So that's just something to keep in mind, but I can't stress enough, have some notes if that makes you feel a bit better, but just always be prepared and thinking ahead to your next turn. Always have a few players in mind, because with those live drafts, there's nothing worse than a couple of picks before yours, you think you're set, then a couple of picks go your way, and someone selects a couple of guys you wanted, and all of a sudden you're in turmoil, you haven't been thinking about it, you've been talking shit to the boys, and boom, you're in all sorts because you got to rethink it, and the pressure's on you, the clock's ticking down, and you make a mistake, and you draft someone that he's all right, but you don't feel great about it. So I always try and have the next two guys from each line that I'd like to draft, and each draft sort of evolves differently. So when you draft guys and positions is always different, but I always like to have in my head 2, maybe 3 guys that I sort of say, well, look, if he goes, I'm happy to take him next. Or alternatively, if a couple of guys go here and I was originally thinking, gee, I want a defender, but this guy's too good to resist at this stage of the draft, you might change tact. Now I want to talk about a couple of golden rules and a few things to think about. Now, I find the most important and most influential part of the draft is when the first ruckman gets drawn. Now, In my opinion, there's a big advantage to have one of the big three rucks. Previously, it's just been Gawn or Grundy. We can chuck Darcy into that equation as well, I think, now. I know he's got a couple of niggles, but I think you'd be happy to get him now. Always be considering what could still be available next time you come round in the draft. If you've got pick 3 and you go a gun midfielder and pick 5 goes Brodie Grundy, whenever someone picks a ruckman, it's like a domino effect. People go, oh shit, ruckman's been drawn, I need to get on there before I miss the boat. You're sitting back with Clayton Oliver at pick 3, that's great, but by the time your next pick comes round and a few rucks may have been drawn, or at least 4, you know, it's quite often to see a few rucks drawn in a row once that card is dealt. All of a sudden you're sort of like, gee, do I want Nick Nat, or, you know, sort of where am I going here? Is it Rowan Marshall? Am I happy with that? Am I going to lose 15 to 20 points each week, which is a lot in draft? So I think when the first ruckman falls is very interesting, and I always try and strike that blow first. That is purely dependent on what draft number you get allocated. So it is a bit of a risk versus reward, guessing and predicting, you know, when you might be back into the draft table and whether it's worth holding off or not. My first 4 picks, and this is pretty self-explanatory, the first 2 will always be, and I hope not too many of the guys that I'm drafting against are watching this because I'm unveiling my secrets of my game plan. First 2 picks in either combination, gun mid, gun ruck. I always like to lock and load those. And then naturally my 3rd and 4th pick, depending what's on the table, gun defender, gun forward. So I like to just, those first 4 picks, just round out, cover all positions. And from there, you know, you can sit back happy. You got a gun ruckman, that's awesome, big advantage. You got a big dog to be your captain, either the midfielder or the ruckman. And then you can sort of fill out the positions as you go. And my second tip would be always have faith in the midfield. There will always be, and this depends how big your draft is, but from my experience with drafts that have 8 or 10 teams, there is always guys that can give you 90 plus pretty comfortably, even deep in the draft, where comparatively to the defence and the forward line, they can get snapped up pretty quick, and all of a sudden you're picking between a guy that you think could average 81 and a bloke that, you know, has averaged 76 last year, and you're like, shit, there's heaps of depth in the midfield. So what do I mean by this? I would prioritise building the defence and the forward line just a round or 2 ahead of when you're building your midfield, if that makes sense. So you've got your ruck, you got your 2 mids, you got 2 forwards, 2 defenders. You know, next 2 draft picks, maybe go a 3rd forward and a 3rd defender. Deal with your midfield next, and you know, that type of thing. Just keep the forward and defence maybe a step ahead of the midfield, because I think particularly when you get midway and deep into the draft, you don't want to miss too many outstanding scorers in the midfielder early, because obviously there is a lot of them. But once the real dominant forces move away and get selected, that midway point to the end of the draft, there is still going to be a lot of depth in the midfield. So just keep that in mind. There's no need to panic on the midfield. I know there are more spots that we have to fill in the midfield, but from my experience, you don't need to panic on the midfield. You can always find replacements and that sort of thing. I think another interesting point is have a real understanding of the guys that are missing the early part of the season, but when they're coming back, because a lot of people will just not consider picking them, particularly people that might not research it as much as you. They'll go, oh, I heard Sam Walsh was injured, I'm not picking him. But you're like, you know, whenever he's coming back, you're like, hang on, I might be a midfielder down for the first 4 or 5 weeks, or Toby Green might be an example too. I might be down a mid or a forward 4 or 5 weeks for the season, but the other 16, I'm going to pick up a premium way later than I should. So I'm often happy, and again, it depends how your draft evolves. Sometimes if a guy's there and he's too good to resist, he's fallen way too far, but yeah, he's out for a month or so, I would still go with him. I'm happy to drag a couple of zeros early on, because it's not like Classic where we're trying to uphold that ranking throughout the year. Draft, you can get by depending on the coverage you have, obviously. But I think that's another thing to just keep in mind. And my final point, and this is for during the season, I do think drafting is super important. I think you can set your year up super well. Maybe slightly preference durable players if you can too. because nothing hurts more than losing a premium during the season, and all you can sort of do is look at this free agency pool, which are the leftovers, let's face it. So it ain't like Classic. You can't bring in a premium for a premium. So if you're weighing up between two guys and they're pretty much even Stevens, I try to go towards the more durable guy. Doesn't always work out that way. You can get unlucky like anything else. And like I was saying before, free agency, crucial throughout the year. Like I said, you can set yourself on a really, really good path and set yourself away from a lot of your mates on draft day. But a lot of times I see some massive moves made in free agency, and that's just a matter of jumping on the laptop on a Monday and just seeing who's in form, because we always have, you know, a fourth or fifth defender or a sixth midfielder he's all right, he's contributing well, but you could cut him. You know, if push comes to shove, you could cut him. So always be mindful of guys who are on fire for a month or two. You know, don't be scared to bring in a guy for a month and turf him. You know, some players just have hot streaks through the season, so just keep an eye on that. Often people don't always look early in the week. SuperCoach trades sort of start to get thought about later as we get closer to the weekend. So if you can lock and load a bit of a free agency movement on a Monday and the waiver comes through on Tuesday, sometimes your mates might have not even thought about it. So it's just something to keep in mind. Just always stay wary of who's available and that type of thing. So I wish you all the best if you've got a draft coming up. I'm currently trying to organise when mine will be. We normally snake the draft order, 90 seconds per draft, and we always try and get most of the people, not everyone can make it, but most of us over to my place to draft. So it should be a bit of fun. So hopefully that has helped you. If you've got any specific draft questions, or even if you're just scrolling through and you're in the middle of your actual draft over a course of a few days and you've got, you know, you're weighing it up between so-and-so and so-and-so, feel free to comment. I might not get to it in time, but Saturday afternoon I'll probably check a few comments. So hopefully that has helped you out a little bit. Bit of a ramble, but hopefully it helped you out in some capacity. I'll be back soon. Cheers.